Hello, everyone. Welcome to this radcast of the Social Club at the End of the World, focusing on the topic of a new story for humanity, which, of course, we see as vital to getting humanity to reorient ourselves to healing Mother Earth and saving as much life on Earth as possible, including but not limited to reversing climate change, stopping the sixth mass extinction, and stopping the destruction of the biosphere, and then from stopping, going to healing. So stopping the harm, starting the healing. So obviously, we need a new story for humanity that I kind of see as the crystal for generating a new culture, a new mode of production for the global economy, etc. So with that, I want to acknowledge and welcome everyone. I'm here with my colleague and co-host Michael, and we're here in California. We're on the road. I want to welcome Alex from Texas, Aaron, I don't know where Aaron's coming from geographically, Adam from Olympia, Washington, and Miles from Calgary, Canada. Welcome, everyone. Going on mute.
Well, hello, and this is Adam, and I'm glad to be here and looking forward to this conversation too.
Hello, this is Miles Flegg calling from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I'm looking forward to this conversation too. One of the things in the news here today, you may have heard of a pipeline to be built from Edmonton, basically from the oil sands, tar sands, whatever you want to call it, down to Vancouver, British Columbia. It's quite a controversy, and today the government announced it will pay for this estimated $7 billion pipeline because of the controversy with that Kinder Morgan is experiencing. So I look forward to talking to that.
All righty. Well, before we started broadcasting, we were talking about the topic of, kind of like who we are and what's our mission here at the Social Club at the End of the World. And Adam brought up that we could think of ourselves as a think tank, where we're not the climate scientists, but we can look at the different proposals and studies on the table and put together, I don't know, talk about different sort of meta strategies, different solutions. Right now, we're talking about solutions at the level of essentially human culture, right? And how do we transform fundamentally who we are, right? And when I think of it, a story for humanity, it really answers the question: who are we? Why are we here? What's our mission? And are we separate? Are we united? And I think I mentioned offline or on the previous hangout that our current story for humanity, if we had to put it in a nutshell, our current modality of life could be summarized by the following statement: the more you hoard for yourself, the better off you will be. That's kind of the game that I would say most of humanity is playing, whether we're conscious of it or not. So much of education is focused on the career you're going to have and how much money you're going to make. And, our alarm clocks go off at 6 in the morning and we go to places we don't like, to work with people we don't like, to make money, right? So much of our existence maps to hoarding. Versus a whole completely different modality of life, based on sharing and actually healing Mother Earth. But before we get into changing the modality, what seems to be upstream from that, is it? Okay, very good. Alex is posting some comments to help manage. I appreciate that. That's awesome. What I see is upstream of this whole transformation in culture and modality of life and mode of production of the global economy is the fundamental question: who are we and why are we here? Are we here to hoard and accumulate and pump up our ego? Are we here to heal this wonderful spaceship called Mother Earth? Who are we and why are we here? And I see that Miles has something to say, so I will go on mute. Thank you, Miles. Go for it.
Okay. Well, I have another device over here. I'd like to say hello to Maria Vargas. She's tuned in, and Deborah Tessman McKenna. She's tuned in. So nice to see everybody there. And Adam Thomas. So with respect to this, how do we create a new narrative? How do we get things going, changing in our value system so that those ideas we were trying to kick around in the first hour, actual technical fixes, are attended to, that we get doing something engineering-wise to refreeze the Arctic? My proposition to everybody is in keeping with what I've been reading over the last 3 years. And a lot of these thought leaders, I would say, are American, such as Sheldon Woolen, who talks about inverted totalitarianism. He's written a book called Democracy Incorporated. So in other words, don't really think that we're necessarily living in a democracy. That's could be a serious deception. Yeah, we're not living necessarily in a Hitler Nazi Germany, but that's classical totalitarianism. But we have to ask ourselves, are we living in inverted totalitarianism? So to that end, I've been trying to figure out what it is that I need to do to attend to environmental issues. And having teenage children, I pledged 3 years ago this month, coming up in June, to my daughter that this deteriorating condition of the oceans is unacceptable, and I will help to do something about it. You know, but 3 years ago, I'm thinking, okay, what's the issue there that they're talking about in school? I'll have to learn something about it. So I thought, well, I've heard about plastic. So I guess it's plastic and it's overfishing. Well, since then, the issues I'm realizing in my lack of knowing are, as somebody said, I quote the person, I can't remember what, it's a system of cascading crises. So there's so much more. I can't even keep up with trying to figure out what to do. In a sense, I've been thinking, and I am going to do it, and I promised I would actually present it today, a letter to our head of state. Now, who put the bug in my ear to write a letter to the head of state? In your case, to President Trump. In my case, it's to the Governor General of Canada. Well, it's Ralph Nader. He's got a whole book about his letters to the president. He's been doing this for decades in the United States, and he wants everybody to do that. Write letters, form town halls, and send a summons. He has the idea of, and he even has it in one of his books. He's got it pre-printed for you in the United States, a summons for your representatives, congressmen, or House of Representatives, senators, I guess is what you have as well. So I'm thinking, well, that I need to do that here in a Canadian context. And I have actually, over the past 3 years, I have several drafts. And I was trying to get one together here today, but I have these drafts, and I can do some reading of those excerpts at some point in time. And I have the letter, just one thing before I go on mute here to let somebody else speak. I have our head of states. Well, our head of state is actually the Queen Elizabeth II, or who is also holds the title Queen of Canada. She's officially our head of state, but she has a Governor General. Her name is Her Excellency Julie Payette. She's an amazing woman. I've just looked up her details. She spent 25 days on the space station. She's an electrical engineer. She's got a PhD, and she's our Governor General. She's in charge. She's the commander in chief, in fact, of our armed forces here. And she says, she draws on her 25 days on the space station, and she says, we're all on the same spaceship, Earth, and she calls for us to do some things. Anyway, I better go on mute.
Yeah, I'd really like to keep it focused. Like, what is our new story for humanity? We just got a 2-minute mini resume of, Queen whatever.
Well, sorry, Jamin. I'm just saying, we have to be directors. We got to step up to the plate and remind these people who are supposedly our leaders. No, we're the directors. So there's your change in attitude. We start acting like owners, not serfs.
Gotcha. Okay, now I get your point. Because before I didn't get your point. I was just like, why am I hearing all this stuff about the Queen whatever and the space station? I really want to get focused. How are we going to change the story? Okay, fine. So from serfs to directors. But so that's an important point. Anyway, I'm just saying I really want to focus on, the point. What is this new story that we're creating for humanity? So,
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
So you asked, who are we and why are we here? Okay, so the simplest reason that who we are, all I know is that we are the most intelligent creature on this planet. We have consciousness. No other creature on this planet has the consciousness that human beings have. We have the ability to literally move a comet out of the way if it was heading towards the Earth. So the reason we're here, as far as I'm concerned, is to protect life on this planet. Because in all of our research and our telescopes that reach billions of miles out into space, we're the only planet that we know of that with life. So I think it's our responsibility and our duty, and especially considering all the, we've been on this, the humanoid has been on this planet for like 2.5 million years. I mean, our responsibility is to watch over life and protect it. And so one thing we don't do, I think Miles or somebody was mentioning totalitarianism and these different forms of government. And we always compare ourselves to these different forms of government, but we never go back and compare ourselves to the hunters and gatherers. And if you think about it, the hunters and gatherers lived on the earth. Every generation was the same. And they lived on the earth for many tens of thousands of years without destroying the planet. So it's only since we've become civilized, like in the last 6,000 years, that we've destroyed the planet. And we always want to go back and compare our ways now to ways since we've become civilized, which I think we're missing an important point here, because when we compare our ways to when we become civilized, we're comparing against methods that are known to have not worked. And so if we go back and we compare our ways to the ancient man and how he lived, then we'll be thinking about then we'll be thinking about ways that did work. And of course, we have our modern technology and stuff. So somehow we have to figure out, in my opinion, how we can make things work and compare ourselves to ancient man. We've already made mistakes as the civilized man. I don't think we're going to do it that way. For a new way of life is got to be take us back to our ancient roots.
Am I next, Alex? Okay, thanks. So now we're getting to the heart of something, right? Of, should we have civilization or should we go back to some ancient form of life? The way I see it, the way I would put forward this new story for humanity is when we were hunter-gatherers, we were living in a way that was in balance with nature. Now, then civilization, modern agriculture, money, yada, yada, all this stuff. And, you know, a few thousand years later, we are deep into overshoot and planetary destruction. So it's natural to say, well, obviously that was a mistake. Let's go in reverse. But another possibility is instead of going in reverse, we simply change direction, not simply, but we change directions and say, okay, now that we've got all this human population and technology and knowledge and academia and all that, how do we use this to be effective custodians for beginning to heal Mother Earth, to stop the harm and start the healing? It's not necessarily in reverse. It might be in a whole different direction. With that, I'm going to go on mute and pass it to Alex.
No, that's a good point about just how, what's it, Adam brought up about, you know, we talk about different forms of governments versus whatever hunter-gatherer caveman thing, in that one of my favorite quotes, not my favorite quotes, just the quote is like, I forgot what book it is, but the first line of the book is, it's easier to imagine the end of civilization than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. You know, we're so inundated with ads and all that stuff that we forget, you know, the Earth is 4.5 billion, anyway, it's impossible to imagine this on an individual scale, but Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Human beings, they say at maximum, are 300 million years old, Homo sapiens, right? Civilization's 10,000 years old. So that means like all little episode in time, all little epoch of civilization, Roman, Mayan, even you want to include all of them, is nothing compared to the universe, which is 13 billion years old. And the thing is, someone pointed this out to me, like when you're in history class, even as a school kid, you don't learn about cavemen, right? You probably start off, I think I started off at Christopher Columbus. So like immediately my history starts out with looting and pillaging the earth and other people, right? You don't learn about, hey, you know, there was a good maybe millions of years when apes just kind of sat around and did whatever. And then that comes into something people talk about, geoengineering. Well, you know, people talk a lot about geoengineering, and it's what's interesting is we do know how to geoengineer the planet correctly, good geoengineering, and that's called do nothing. Just let the planet be. You know, the Earth has been, will geoengineer itself if you just let the plants grow, if you don't cut it down, if you don't build cement, you know, if we don't build civilizations, geoengineering is great. And it's just that our technologies usually have a way of backfiring on us. You know, fire, great idea. It's here. It's the reason I feel great in my house right now, probably because of air conditioning and electricity, but releases carbon into the air, right? And then over time, we're here, right? So like, that's the interesting story is we kind of can't go back to an agrarian way of life because we have 7 billion people on the planet. We achieved overshoot, but you can only achieve overshoot temporarily before killing the planet. I will say one point from the last chat. Jason brought up he met a contractor. I thought that was awesome. I would love it if you could hear more about that. I just like complimenting people in the other chats just because it's nice. And that's cool, and I'm glad everyone's trying in their way they can. And I'm done.
I'll hop in here for a second. Yeah, we'll talk maybe next week when we come back to the refreezing or the cooling the planet, Alex. I'll bring it up again and we can talk about it further. I was going to say, in a story for humanity, one thing that I feel like I think about now on a regular basis is kind of been brought to light by listening to these Alan Watts chill step mixes. Now, maybe that sounds a little ridiculous, but Alan Watts is a philosopher, and he's most popular for popularizing Eastern philosophy and religion in the United States and the Western world, in speaking about it in such a way that people could understand it. But I just think that one thing I've kind of gotten from that is that whatever larger story we sort of tell ourselves, and one he talks about is sort of the creationist story, and that this sort of idea that we just sort of got dropped into this world, like that we're almost out of this world, like we're not a part of it. And so the difference of coming into the world versus coming out of the world, and the difference of believing that you are one with everything around you, your environment, because if you really think about it, you wouldn't be able to exist without the environment, without the relationship that's constantly going on, the exchanges of energy and whatnot. There would be no relationship with your environment. You would just be floating in the vacuum of space. That wouldn't be a very good existence, and it's not possible. So it's just, point being that I think there's a disconnect in people's brains on their relationship to the natural world and the environment, and that this allows them to destroy the environment, whether it be by using a fossil fuel vehicle, so we sort of have to change moral ideas in the back of people's heads, get them to sort of maybe care about the natural world and to feel one with, the natural world and one with everything. And if we don't really, if we don't really embody that, if we don't really take that on and really feel that way and really act with every buying decision and everything with that, I think that idea alone could, change. I know that Adam sometimes says money, and I also think that that's a big issue. It would be nice if we could all just come together and live in communes and grow food and share it with each other. But I think is trying to get to a story in the background. I feel like there's the dominant story is just that we are the shepherds of the world and we came into it and we can destroy it and manipulate it and do whatever we want to it, versus trying to live in harmony with the environment, trying to live in harmony with the rest of the living creatures on the planet, and not necessarily saying things like we're the most intelligent beings on the planet, because maybe being intelligent in the long run is actually killing ourselves. That's all I got.
Yeah, to follow up on Jason, if I'm in order. Jason, I was just reading that with respect to our calling ourselves Homo sapiens, wise ones or ones who know, it's only because the fellow, he was Swedish, he was the fellow that started the whole system by which species are named, and he decided that, we're the wise ones. So there's an article in here about how, maybe we should rethink that. Maybe we're not really the wise ones. But Jamin, I got diverted into our governance structure. But to get back to, what Ralph Nader is saying is that this new narrative going forward, we have to recognize, the masses of people have to recognize that if we are going to change the appropriation where money gets allocated into different projects, we have to show that we are actually the power that drives this vehicle, this government. And until we wake up, as Sheldon Woolen, American philosopher who died recently, talked, that we have to seize the steering wheel and just give the instruction, we're in charge, then we can get the money. And again, is money real? Is it a poison? Yeah, I think to a certain degree, there's something fishy about money. I agree, because I think it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He basically said, okay, we have to, coming out of this depression in the dirty 30s, he basically decreed, you're going to put people to work. You're going to build highways. You're going to build national parks and trails and all these other dams, hydroelectric dams. So to a certain degree, money is just some sort of weird creation that at a whim, the leaders that be can say, well, okay, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to upgrade $1 trillion on nuclear weapons. We're going to put $1 trillion into saving the planet. Now, what that will take is coming to terms with the fact that there's a lot of money being made by arms sales since the 50s. It's become a big business, and it's in the arms dealers to have always some friction with somebody and some fear that we have to be afraid of the Russians now again, And one of the new narratives is that we have to actually realize as this new Republic of the Heart ethos for revolutionaries says, that we have to actually call out these deceptions and realize. I've been to Moscow and Leningrad years ago, and they're just ordinary people. They're as frightened as us as we are of them. And at the end of the day, if you meet them one-on-one, they're nice people. But there's something in between that's messing with our ability to relate to each other on this planet. And a lot of it has to do with this scam of an economic system that we're captured by.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing emerge is not only do we need to, in this new story for humanity, identify, the utopia we want to get to and the pathway to get there, but also some understanding of how did we go so far wrong? How did we get into this cluster mess in the first place, so that we don't repeat that mistake or similar mistakes? And, I just think back to my own childhood. I was born and raised, for the most part, in and around a structure, a home where there's stuff, and there's my toys and my brother's toys and versus the neighbor's toys. And so we're born into this world of stuff and accumulation and separation and hoarding. And this treating money like it's this, sacred thing. So anyway, I'm just saying for the new story for humanity, part of that is understanding how did we go so far wrong onto this path of onto this destructive path that we're on. And so, like for example, you mentioned, FDR and the New Deal and all that, putting people back to work, doing these construction projects and all that. What was the story that was driving that? And I'll sum it up referencing the writer Charles Eisenstein, who wrote a book about this called The Ascent of Humanity. And that was kind of our story that was driving us for centuries, if not millennia, is that, hey, we're moving on up, and more technology is better, more infrastructure is better, more is better, and then whoops, we realized we overshot. So if not, the ascent of humanity technologically and whatnot, what is the new story? What is the new goal? And I think it should be all about healing Mother Earth. So the new story for humanity for me starts with, how did we get here? We overshot, right? And we got into this possession trance. This accumulation hoarding trance. And, when we realized that at this moment and realized we need to go into a radically new course, we need to identify what that utopian destination is and what's the pathway to get there. Anyway, that's kind of my latest thinking on the big picture. Going on mute.
Yeah, I think that developing a utopia I agree that's the story that we're looking for. The Bible does talk about the Garden of Eden, and when we think about utopia, that's kind of like where most of us go back to the Garden of Eden. And then in Christianity, we sinned and we're kicked out of the Garden of Eden. But just as an interesting point I'd like to make is that Jesus, in Christianity, Jesus came back to, and I don't want to get into religious conversation here, but he did come back to save us from our sins. So if that's the case, then why can't we return to the Garden of Eden? That's my question. If he came back to save us for our sins, then Christianity should be for this principle that we should reverse our direction of progress and progress towards the utopia that we want, which is essentially this Garden of Eden, where we take our technology with us and we live with an extremely light footprint on the earth. I mean, that's one of the things I say about returning to hunters and gatherers and looking at that. Well, there's things that they did that caused them to live on the earth for many thousands of years without destroying the earth. For one thing, every generation was the same. They didn't experience population overshoot. They did not have increased technology. Their technology basically remained fairly much the same for all that time, and they were happy. And the studies show that they were happy and intelligent. And their brains were much the same size as ours, and there's evidence to that they did not have bad lives. They may have had shorter lives than ours, but that's all relative. That's all I wanted to say right now. Thanks.
I'll jump in. Yeah, no, I thought Jason brought up a good point. I thought Adam brought up a good point in just that, could we go back to the agrarian way of life, the caveman style? And Jason, I was going to reference Jason's point in that I don't think this is talked about a lot. I've read some economic books. I like how everyone reads, by the way. That's all I can tell them with intelligent people. Everyone's like, oh, they're reading a cool book. Always, if you're reading a cool book, please email me. But they never talk about the psychological implications of society or capitalism. And I would say one thing our society does very well, especially capitalism, is psychologically it severs us from Mother Earth. So you don't get your food from the earth. You get your food from the grocery store, right? If you plant, the only time I planted in my life, I did Boy Scouts and I got the gardening merit badge, and I hated gardening. You had to plant some carrots, whatever. I forgot that you had to sign some check marks. But I got the merit badge and I hated gardening and stuff. And I had a little plot in the background and I just hated it. But I just went to Whole Foods to get my breakfast this morning. And so I just don't think that, like Adam said, our generations have changed drastically. In fact, we have names for our generations: the Xers, the Boomers, the Lost Generation, which is the World War II people, whatever, my grandfather or whatever. And then what are they calling the generation after me? Generation Y or whatever. So, and they are completely different. And we've been severed from the earth, and now I think we're severed from each other. I'm a developer. I make apps. I make iPhone applications. And I go home, and I'm about to go home to see my sister's graduation. And I talk to my friends, and all people my generation met everyone in a dating app. They met everyone with Tinder. We all joke about swiping right on things because that's how people my age now meet or socialize with the people. And depression in the United States is going up every year because people are so isolated. We're not meant to stare at screens all day. Even to the extent we're chatting here, this isn't full human connection. Full human connection is to be around the bonfire. And if you ever catch me in a moment of truthfulness, I'll always say the best moments of my life is when I'm interacting with someone else in person. Anyway, that's it for me. Great points, everyone.
So I think you're right, and that's another thing you just hit on, Alex, is that this separation from the physical, natural world. And you also just said, everybody's sitting staring at these screens all day. If we could have more one-on-one interaction with each other. I think I heard that 80% of human beings' satisfaction with life comes out of their meaningful relationships with other human beings. So when you throw somebody in a deprivation tank in prison for 23 hours a day, it really takes a psychological toll. And I think it's the same way when people go from their little box house with their TV that just keeps them thinking the way the TV wants them to think, to their car where they listen to some radio show that's along the lines of what they want to think. And they go to work and they don't talk to anybody because they sit in a little cubicle all day. Even if you're a cash register person, that's not a meaningful relationship and connection or interaction with another person, constantly having people hand you change and checking out their items and all that. So there's definitely a disconnect that we have. And I think it would definitely require us to not necessarily have to go back to hunters and gatherers, because I don't even know if it's possible to feed 7 billion people with, hunting and gathering. I think we've killed most of the animals on the planet, and, we'd be, and so another thing I wanted to mention was there are old civilizations, and Chaco culture is an article just written by Chris Hedges about this civilization in the Arizona, New Mexico region during, you know, I'd have to look up the dates, but the civilization was really, really big and at its peak around 1000 to 1300. But basically they chopped down all their trees, kind of like Easter Island chopped down all their trees. And they had to go further and further for resources. And they were basically taking advantage of the people who grew the food for them. And so they reverted to violence and hoarding, and the wealthy elites kind of built their own little towns in these cliff sides so that they could sort of just isolate themselves from the common people. But they kind of failed to realize that they then wouldn't have food because they're living in these isolated little places and they don't have food. So their whole society collapsed into like violence, and then there was a drought and they all starved to death. And when the Apache, like more collector gatherers, you know, 100, 200, 300 years later started coming through and seeing these ruins, they saw that there was dead bodies in there, and they sort of like thought that these were the enemy ancestors. This was what the Anasazi meant, was these enemy ancestors. So they had their own little mythology going on of what these structures were and meant. I guess my only point is that, you know, it's that we could argue, what is it, population? Is it this? Is it that? But collectively, I mean, we all need to sort of consume less, live more within our means, and I think trying to reevaluate the way in which we live and not being separated from each other and watching televisions and looking at computer screens, but living in a community, growing and growing more of our own food, having that connection to the actual physics of growing your food, you know, like, and so I don't know, but I still think it's caring about your natural world and your environment enough to say, well, I'm not going to have 7 kids because I would destroy the environment if I have that many kids, because I would need to cultivate so much land. But anyways, I don't know how to get people back on focusing on the natural world, but it's a good point that Alex brings up, that somehow capitalism kind of disconnects us and people don't get the natural world at all.
Yeah, Jason. So the point you made about hunters, and we can't go back to all hunters and gatherers. But you also made the point that what we need is to reduce our footprint on Earth. Well, if we keep comparing ourselves to civilized man kept changing from generation to the next. His technology improved, and he grew in money. Money kept getting more important, and population kept going up. If we compare ourselves to the hunters and gatherers, their populations didn't keep going up. They didn't keep going up in technology. But we can't go back in technology. But we can take our technology with us and use it to help us lightening our footprint on Earth. And part of that is population control. And I think population control should be voluntary. And I think that there's a lot we can do to create this utopia and take our technology with us. We don't have, scientists tell us that the average number of people on the Earth back in the hunter-gatherer day was about 10 million people all over the globe, roughly. Well, we don't want to go back that far. But we do need to reduce the population in a humane way, and that would be a voluntary, temporary sterilization way. So we have yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Just to add on to, since you commented on what I said, I agree with what you're saying. What I'm thinking about too is there's ways to change agriculture and do, like, if any of you are aware with aquaponics, it's a way of growing plants in water medium. The water is cycled between like fish tanks where you cultivate fish, and the fish waste poop and pee feed the plants, and the plants clean the water for the fish. And there's a bacteria process in there too, which I won't go into, but it uses less space to grow more food, and it uses less water, even though sometimes people think, well, you have to have so much water, but it's like, no, when you just spray the water out there, a lot of that water is just evaporating. And I think that if we brought, urban gardening, urban farming into the cities and had more, more of these type of technologies that we know work, and we can grow more food in a smaller footprint and reduce the amount of water intake that agriculture takes, that we can, by using that technology, sorry, there's like a freaking jet fighter like going over my house right now. I don't know if I'm about to like blow up or something, but
you're being too radical, so they're about to take you out. It's been good knowing you, Jason. Going on mute.
Anyways, I was just saying that we're obviously going to have to use technology to get us out of this mess. I'm not saying we get rid of technology, but Fuller, everybody knows Fuller. I mean, he was, he would always say that our waste products in the future will be used. Like if we use everything full cycle, full circle, we could probably even figure out a way to use the carbon coming out of our gas tanks to do something useful instead of just dumping it in the atmosphere. And then we, so anyways, I think there's, solutions out there. And I guess I'm getting a little off track, so I'll just shut up now.
Yeah, I'd like to touch upon the point that Jason made a little earlier about rising levels of depression in people. But before I get to that, the changing of the narrative and how did we get to this point that we're in, I think it's very important for us to realize some of the major deceptions that have been occurring. Okay, so the Bible was brought up just briefly, and I think people need to be aware that the Bible, as much as it has a tremendous amount of value, there are some serious errors and omissions, and I think we would say they're even done purposefully. For example, in the Council of Nicaea, the Holy Spirit was changed from being originally feminine to masculine. In Genesis, when Eve has eaten from this apple of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Adam is standing right there and saw the whole thing. And his response to, well, why, from God, the creator, why did you eat from that tree, Eve? And she said, something to the effect that I've been deceived. I could be a bit wrong. And Adam says, God turns to him, says, well, the woman you sent me. So there's an attitude of objectification of women in our society. And indeed, Genesis in most Bible translations has Eve defined or translated as a helper, when the more correct interpretation, the translation in the ancient language, is actually rescuer. Okay, so there's a disharmony that has been occurring for quite a few years, thousands of years, with respect to the masculine and the feminine balance. And to learn some more about this situation and the difference between our culture and the indigenous cultures, which lived happily for quite a few years. They weren't perfect, but tens of thousands of years before we arrived. I just encourage everybody to listen to this podcast. I'm not sure if it's coming in clearly, but it's at Future Primitive, all one word, futureprimitive.org. And the person interviewed is her English Anglo name is Sherry Mitchell. And she's a Penobscot First Nations from Maine, the state of Maine. And she has a book called Sacred Instructions. And this podcast is titled Sacred Instructions. And she has some very powerful words of wisdom with respect to how did we get into this disharmony. I'll just share that for everybody, because I know online people were saying, yeah, depression and mental health issues are rising. So I just wanted to address that and suggest people tune into that. futureprimitive.org.
All righty. Well, I think Adam just wrote, what is the, something to the effect of what is the utopia that we want to, like, where do we want to get to? I think we, we've got some degree of understanding of how we went wrong and how we overshot and how we're destroying the planet and all that. And it's easy to get overwhelmed by the negative of all that, including our isolation from each other and everything else. I think it would be powerful to take a few minutes and talk about, where do we want to get to, right? Separate from the discussion of how do we get there from here, right? That's, what I call the pathway from here to there. But before we talk pathway, where do we want to get to, right? What does our utopia look like? I'll just start with a couple few thoughts and then invite everyone to jump in. But one is obviously in the utopia of the future, we've got a massively smaller footprint, right? So what is that? How do we have a smaller footprint? We share, rather than each of us having to have our own McMansion and create our own universe inside that McMansion. Communal kitchens, communal playgrounds, communal play spaces, parks, right? Public beaches, et cetera, et cetera. So much more sharing. And with that sharing, guess what? We'll interact with people more, right? And so we'll get that beautiful, wonderful human interaction that makes life worth living for us humans, right? As opposed to being isolated. So sharing, sharing stuff, sharing land, sharing resources, and sharing time with each other. I think, that's really, fundamental to this utopia. So going on mute.
Cool. Great point, Jamin. I just wanted to add one thing to your point, to piggyback off your point, and I thought it was great, but also with where we want to go, I think I think there are a lot of solutions on how we can create a better world as humans. So I read a few books on this. There's like sharing economy, socialism, or whatever, community, right? Why do we have this car service called Uber that we all have to pay for? Why don't we just all have a community car service where you can take my car, he can take your car, and we all can just exchange cars along the way? And then if we go to another city, we can all somehow exchange that or figure out a way to do that without, it being in basically this private capitalism Ponzi scheme in a way. But also, another thing that also gets pointed out, and I think it just shows you how much we forget the natural world. To actually solve the problem, kind of the big change we need to make is that we as human beings, we are number two. We're not number one. We like to be number one, but we're number two. The earth is number one. We're doing all these community things. We're doing all these, sharing and caring among each other. But we also are with the rhino. We're also helping out the bees. We're also helping out the insects, right? Because we need them. We don't think we do. The only reason we're all here is because we're like, oh, that nature thing, it's important. And we spent the last 250 years really messing it up, right? And it's hard because I think all of us here, all of us live pretty privileged lives. And privilege is we can discuss what privilege is to an extent, but like one extent of privilege, the way I'm using it is that when we turn on the lights turn on. A coal-powered factory goes off and electricity comes on. So that's reconnecting with nature is tough because like almost anyone alive has lost their connection to nature, unless you're an indigenous person, in which case we're working really hard to kill you because you're probably on oil. No, I'm a little tongue-in-cheek there, but it's kind of true, right? Yeah, so like that's where I think kind of the ecological and the community meet. They actually meet. Biocentrism is the term. So they meet in the center of that we can create a community where we exist on the earth. And as for before they were talking about the population problem, and the population problem is really interesting, I think, to talk about, because sometimes I see people, they get mad and they say we have a population problem, and it's never talked about, just like global dimming is never talked about, because if you say we have a population problem, before you even go deeper than that, you're saying like, oh, we should kill a bunch of people. We should wipe, X number of people off the earth. Well, the real equation is population times average footprint, right? If everyone's average footprint was 0, the population could be infinity. Not really, because we have entropy and such, but you get it. That's the true equation. So if you lower average footprint, so it's like we have the footprint of 10 million people 10,000 years ago. I don't think that's possible, but to some degree, doing that, it's tough. And I think we will have population decline no matter what. Whether we solve the problem, solving the problem will declare population decline. Not solving the problem is going to really decline population. So that's going to happen regardless, very sadly. And that's why I don't think people like talking about it. But that's it for me. Adam's next.
Yeah, I'd just like to give my own little vision of utopia. And so I see utopia as like you're living in a kind of a small underground home, and you've got a bike trail in front of you, and you've got free energy, and you've got high-speed internet. I mean, and really all this technology, but we're not using it to consume the earth. We're using it to live. And so instead of having to go to Europe on an airplane and burn all that fossil fuel, we could do it by proxy on the internet. And so I think that our technology can help us lighten our load, our footprint on the earth dramatically. And I think population reduction is also a part of that. And we can do it voluntarily. But right now, we can't do it because we've got, companies out there that are doing TV shows and advertising that are inciting women's hormones to have more babies when really we shouldn't. And it's the wrong way to conduct life. I mean, the U.S. or there's a report out that says that the average woman has about 2.3 children per woman, and if we could reduce that down to 1 in one generation, we could reduce the population, like half. I mean, it's not really impossible at all. We just need to get everybody on board and explain to them the benefits, because every generation is different. So that the generation today faces a new horizon than the generation of yesterday. And their new horizon that they face today is different than any horizon that mankind has ever faced before. And so if they're facing death, and this is not cool. So our most imperative mission is to provide a life that can go on. We want, and in order to do this, we have to. We're trying to come up with this vision of utopia. So I'll bow out right there. Thanks.
So I wanted to jump in with what I thought about my vision of utopia was. And Miles was sort of talking about feminism in a way, about how feminism energy kind of, and I remember we had Dr. Utopia on here a while back, and she was, obviously very into feminism. And I think that her and some other times have these specific ideas of what they're going to rebuild all of civilization in a sustainable way. They're going to build these new cities that are going to be sustainable. I guess what I always think of is we're going to have to find a way, like me thinking in Los Angeles here, we have a lot of roads, for instance, and everything's pretty flat. We're not as stacked up as a city like New York City. But like as oil starts running out and people realize that driving their cars all the time is ruining the world, if people could come together in smaller blocks of communities and grow more food for themselves, centralized there. One option too would be possibly turning half of the roads or a quarter of the roads in Los Angeles back into like agriculture to grow food for the population that lives there, so that, you know, Los Angeles wouldn't be so dependent on outside resources and having to ship stuff long distances to get to you. I think that the remaining roads could be primarily used more for bicycles and instead of, you know, whatever. But I guess sometimes I feel like I start dreaming about what the utopian goal is. And it's just like we could keep spouting this stuff out all day of what each individual person's direction. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't think we can build all new cities, just tear everything down and build a bunch of new stuff, because that would release a massive amount of carbon. So I think we're going to have to retrofit a lot of things and try to use technology to make, you know, figure out a way to make it carbon neutral. But you know, even Guy McPherson says that apparently he believes that even if you were to put solar panels and wind up and all this stuff, that civilization is still a heat engine, according to him. And so I guess he would say no matter what, we're, you know what, and, you know, so I don't know. I guess when I start thinking about utopian, sometimes I get a little, makes me a little depressed because it feels like so insurmountable, the steps that need to be taken.
Well, I think, Jason, your idea of getting out and harvesting our own little gardens is an important one, because apparently the industrial agriculture and all the cows and pigs are the biggest contributor to the carbon dioxide levels, apparently more than our automobiles. So if we actually stopped eating all these animals and cut down, you know, insofar as maybe a little bit of meat, because you do need omega fatty acids for a healthy brain. So there is an issue that has to be broached, that people get these fatty omega-3 fatty acids. But
you have an aquaponics system, you can grow your own fish.
There you go. You know, so we have to get on with this. And that's where I think we need to, in some cases, myself included, I just recently learned what the word apocalypse means. Apocalypse. According to University of Texas journalism professor Robert Jensen, who was interviewed by Hambone Littletail, Humpty Dumpty tribe. I know sometimes we may think not really in agreement with some of his rants, but he does interview some really interesting people. And the word apocalypse, according to Professor Robert Jensen, means unveiling or the unveiling. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a negative word. It can actually be the unveiling of something great and something good. So rewilding of our North American continent and eating a more vegetable-based diet will make for increased species diversification, a healthier diet, and nothing but benefits. However, once again, getting back to the call for us, as Ralph Nader always says on his radio show, ralphnaderradiohour.org, you got to stand up, and it all begins with a conversation. We have to act like directors. We have to rally people. I sometimes wonder, am I like on a different world? Because, as I said today, our federal government of Canada is making sure that this pipeline from the tar sands to Vancouver gets built. And, you know, I'm not going to tie myself to a fence or a bulldozer. if it's democratically the will that this pipeline is to be built and it's legal, all I can do is try to make people aware that, you know, maybe taking $7 billion to build this pipeline, which is nothing but adding CO2, needs to be rethought. We should be putting $7 billion into a new diet and rewilding. With that, I'll mute.
Right, and your last points are really about, you know, the direction, the utopian direction we want to head in. We want to get to is, you know, a world with much more wilderness, much more wild, much more nature, and, you know, not just a diet but a lifestyle that supports that and reduces our carbon footprint. Now, we could, and then of course, you know, we're talking, you know, like, how do we wake people up and get them to realize this pipeline is going in the wrong direction? That for me is in the topic of the pathway to get to this utopia. But the utopia itself, I think we're starting to form a picture of this utopia. Low footprint on planet Earth, a lot more sharing, a lot more spending time together and caring for each other and caring for Mother Earth. You know, the Garden of Eden is a good metaphor. So now I'd like to propose we shift gears, either now or at some point soon, to how do we get there? How do we make that transition, right, from this just hyper-destructive world that we're in now? And I think a big part of it, and perhaps the elephant in the room that needs to be grappled with, is how do we get off of this possession trance and this hoarding trance? You know, it's one thing if groups like ourselves get enlightened and start, you know, making, you know, changes to our own lifestyle and all that. But as long as you've got a critical mass of humanity in this modality of hoarding and possession, this is my land, and I'm going to do modern agriculture here if I feel like it, you know, we're just going to continue on this destructive path. So how do we orchestrate a mass conversion to not only understanding of our current destructive path and the utopia we want to get to, but how do we actually orchestrate a mass conversion to this news story, and to actually weaning ourselves off of, either slowly or abruptly, but one way or another, weaning ourselves off of this hyper-destructive modality of hoarding, and everyone does what they want, to a modality of sharing, where sharing and healing and caring for Mother Earth, the biocentric as well as human-centric. So anyway, those are my comments going on mute.
Yeah, I'd like to reply to that. How do we make this mass conversion? Well, I think that the way we make this mass conversion is we offer people a better plan, a better way of life, and show that to everyone, so they can judge for themselves. So I've been working on a plan, which I call the Road to Life, and I'm very close to publishing it on YouTube. And but it talks about once we ending money, and when we end money, there's things that can happen over really quickly. If you look at the 40-hour work week and you imagine in your mind how many of those hours are spent just dealing with money, just basically just a wasted time, because money is artificial. So we live in this artificial world. And so if we end money, then we can do consolidation. Consolidation will mean that we can reduce the amount of businesses that we need. We don't, for instance, if we get rid of money, we don't have to have all these bank buildings. We don't have to have all these financial institutions, all these, you know, all these, everything that, all this work that's waste, we can get rid of it. If we consolidate business, like you go into a department store today and you just look at the amounts of clothing, all the different myriad of choices that we have that we don't need. The most important thing is to reduce our footprint on Earth. Well, is it more important for you to wear silk ties and have a closet with 50 shoes in them, or is it more important to save the world? Is it more important to lighten our footprint? This is the mentality that we need to develop. And so if we consolidate businesses, we can go into that valley that's been filled up with all kinds of business and buildings and asphalt and concrete, and we can say, well, we don't need a lot of these businesses anymore. We can start turning them over, bulldoze them down, start planting grass and trees, and pretty soon the river and the valley will be running clean again. And so this kind of a scenario is something that's how we get the masses to converse by showing them a better plan. And my consensus or my belief is that if we end use of money, then we can see how we can do this. So, and I'll go on mute. Thanks.
Yeah. So just a quick point about the matriarchy and being in harmony with the patriarchy. It's not to necessarily be all radical feminist, but actually to seek this harmony. There was a guest speaker I heard on YouTube, Andrew Glickson, very knowledgeable, wise scientist. And he said, there's another word that we can use to describe the epoch that we are in, not only the Anthropocene, but we are also in the Plutocene. And what does he mean by Plutocene? It's not the planet Pluto, it's the plutonium epoch. And women were not actually given any sort of equity until World War II came along. And then it was like, oh, we do need to let women into the workforce. They do need to run rivet hammers and such. So I would say that males have to admit that you cannot blame the Plutocene on women. And what that means is that if they come back, if we all do die, and archaeologists start digging around, they will find a layer of plutonium contamination from all the nuclear bombs that have been exploded, all the leakages from nuclear power plants. So I just wanted to make that point. And then in addition, to talk to your point, Adam, about getting rid of money, maybe we can get Terry Patton back on, author of The New Republic of the Heart, an ethos for revolutionaries. He works with this other gentleman named Ken Wilber. And there's a concept of how we have to actually go back to tribes, in a sense. We have to go back to the Dunbar number. If I remember correctly, it's about 150 people. So if you and I each went out in our neighborhood, and I would suggest by postal code, Ken Wilber says if you get 10% of the people coming on board with an idea, it's likely unstoppable. So you go to your postal code. You don't have to get everybody. You just look for 10% of the people that agree. You work in this small group of 150 people. You don't need money. You'll go out and plant trees. You'll plant your gardens. You'll do rewilding. You'll pick up garbage or plastic. You will lobby your senators and your representatives and tell them stop making plastic. We got to stop industrial agriculture. We have to rewild. And so that's how these gentlemen say that's where you get to, including Ralph Nader, to a new vision. So with that, I'll go on mute.
Yeah, I think now we're getting to a real possible pathway to get to this utopia. And I just want to distinguish between characteristics of the utopia and pathway to get there. Having a money-free society is a characteristic of utopia, and we can analyze and discuss, why that is and the efficiencies of consolidation and all that. But that doesn't answer the question of how to get there. Now, I know, Adam, you said, well, if people realize, if people are simply shown that there's a new path, a new plan, I think just having that down on paper and having a very small number of people understand that, while that might be a seed, how do we go from there to mass understanding and mass adoption? And I think what Miles is talking about is an actual pathway to get there, which is start with a small group, or a group of 150 people, and start implementing it. And there are intentional communities all around the world that do things like this, and that live much more sustainably, and then start to attain some political power. That for me is starting to address the question, to answer the question, how do we get there from here, right? As opposed to more discussion about what the utopia would look like, right? Going on mute.
Well, I like what Miles said about groups. I think that's a really good idea, and that can work. So how do we get people to come on board with this idea? I think, well, like I said, the groups are a good thing. So we need like a mass media enterprise. So how do we do that? Because we need something to happen quickly. And the only way I can think of that we need that we can get things to happen quickly is to convince the elite, because they own the media. I mean, they are the ones that are in control. And I disagree with Miles earlier, who said that we are in control. We're not in control. The people that are really in control are the elite, because they can trump anything that we want. And if they want to go to war, they'll go to war, whether we want it or not. So and we have all this Arctic problem. Well, how come it's not being done? How come it's not being addressed? Well, some reason anyway. We need to bring the elite on board and get their help. And once we can get them to spread the word throughout the media, get the pastors and churches to come on board, the CEOs of corporations to come on board. Even we don't have to get them all, and maybe we only have to get 10%, but we have to reach a critical mass. And once we reach critical mass, then the thing can blossom and we can take off. I don't know how we can do it without the elite's help.
Great point, Adam. Great point, Jamin. Great point, Miles? And I think that's kind of what Adam just brought up, is the great kind of paradox, if it were, in that is like, how do we actually change things? Do we do local? Do we do a movement from below? I'll just call it that, like the civil rights movement, like FDR was pushed by the Wobblies in the Communist Party, if you ever want to read about that. Do you do a grassroots movement which moves the elite, which scares the elite? And I use the elite is a very basic phrase, but I think people get what I mean. And Adam's argument that we need the elite, and it's kind of like, you call it a catch-22 or a paradox, in that, if the elite grabbed this message, walked on with solving the problem, they could do it. But also, the elite are what caused this mess, right? They're the people who benefit the most from this current situation, from killing the Arctic, Rex Tillerson, getting the oil, wars in the Middle East, technology, government, not paying taxes as Amazon does or whatever. So it's just so tough because, I said this to Jamin and Adam, we have a time problem. Like, we really have a year or 2 years left. And it looks, and I remember Adam said in the last one, like, it looks like the Arctic may make it one more year, and we'll see. And even though it's all about the Arctic just going below, like, what, 1 million meters squared or whatever? What's the official measure? 1 million blocks of ice or whatever? Not complete zero. That was still
million square kilometers.
Million square kilometers, yes. So that's what they mean by the Arctic melting, which it went below 2 last year, right? And it's melting exponentially. The graphs do show that. So that's kind of the real quandary is, sadly, this is why, my thing is, my third solution is it's over. We really can't do anything. We've waited way too long. Is that we can't do grassroots because it takes too long. And to ask the elite is to ask them to go against everything they've done, to ask them to give up their power, which is not cool. And I know Jamin has talked to Bill Gates, or I remember he said that. And I would invite Jamin, if he wants to, if he can, to share the story of him talking to Bill Gates. And my question would just be, does someone of the elite, does he understand how dire the situation is? Like, does he understand? Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Like, does he understand, like, because I think there's a big difference between him just being a sociopath, understanding we have, 2 years, just X amount of time until the Arctic melts, and then he just doesn't care because he has, he thinks he can get to Mars or whatever. If he's that, because here's my thing: if you're the elite, if you're a billionaire, I try to put myself empathy here, psychology. If you're a billionaire, your whole life has been aces. Maybe you were poor, maybe you're a self-made billionaire and you actually had to work for it. But once you became a billionaire, your whole life is aces, right? If you want to buy a politician, you do it. If you want to buy land, you do it. There's only 2,000 billionaires, right? And you buy the government. We literally did it with Citizens United. So to imagine a world where you're not drawing aces, where you don't have the best hand on earth, is pretty impossible if all you have is aces. You have no relative standstill to be, a poor Syrian who lost habitat. So that's just kind of the quandary. Gary McPherson calls it a predicament, right? A predicament you can't solve. But the paradox in that, if Donald Trump were to realize the situation and realize he could save humanity and do the greatest task of all time, just to pick one person, it would require him to tell everyone to essentially give up their money. Anyway, that's it for me. James next.
Yeah, good stuff. Really good stuff, you guys. So, whereas I hear where Adam is coming from, where we say, hey, look, we need the elite, and if we just convince them, then they've got all the power and they'll use that power in the right way and all that. I frankly think that's a bit of a pipe dream, just given how addicted the elite are to their massive stack of aces in their hand. They're addicted. It's an addiction. Money is an addiction. Greed is an addiction. Having all this stuff is an addiction. Power is an addiction. So they're deeply addicted. I've said it many times. Bill Gates is the biggest heroin addict on earth. His particular flavor of heroin is called money. So rather than, now on the other hand, we do need to get mass media coverage. We need to bring this conversation to the masses. If for no other reason, so that people like us amongst the masses can say, hey, there are more people like me. I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. There are groups and a movement that I can join. So how do we get media coverage without, convincing the elite or some subset of the elite? Well, Michael and I are now on a big, long road trip. Tomorrow we head to Los Angeles. Jason would love to see you there. And when we get to Los Angeles on Thursday, I'm going to put on my Darth Vader costume, and with my sound system and big signs, I'm going to go to the biggest intersection on the West Coast in terms of automobile traffic. I understand that to be the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and Westwood Boulevard in West LA. massive amounts of car traffic, and there's a good chunk of the car traffic that is the elite, right? Lots of wealth in LA, lots of media in LA. But basically, our strategy is get ourselves out there in public in such a big, audacious way that word spreads, the message spreads through social media, through alternative media, and ultimately through the major media, because we're going to be going not just to big cities like Los Angeles, but to the US-Mexican border at various crossings, starting with San Diego, Tijuana. Later we'll be at El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, and I'll literally be putting my life on the line as I tell the criminal drug cartels to go to hell and that we're going to eradicate them through peaceful means. So this is one pathway to getting a lot of attention. Once we've got the attention, once we've got the media coverage, and I'm on camera talking, I will say all of the relevant points that need to be said. And then that gives people who are listening an opportunity to say, wow, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. There are other people who are out there doing something about this. If they're doing something about this, why not me too? And I think it's so crucial that we present to the world not just an exposition of the problems and that we're in a crisis or predicament or what have you, but A, there is a new direction that's possible, and B, there's a pathway to get there, and C, you want an example of the pathway? You're looking at it. It's taking direct action out in public, building community, getting the word out, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there, going on mute.
Hey, Jamin, I applaud you and your effort, and we're all on the same side. And I hope that you get lots of attention. However, I don't think that we should discount the elite, and that we can get to them. And like Miles says, I don't think we have to get to all of them. Maybe 10%, and because they'll get everybody else on board. Because here's the thing: the elite. You've said yourself, Bill Gates has a plan, and then he's going to go underground and live in some luxurious underground shelter for a long time. Okay, but and you asked Professor Guy McPherson or anything. Everybody, we all know that is not a good plan. It's a scary plan, and so the elite, if they have this plan, would. Then if they have this plan, then by default they know what's happening, and so if they're going to hide out while the rest of the earth dies, they know that the earth is dying, and then if they have this plan to go hide out, that's not a good plan. So if and I see you shaking your head. But and some of them may not know, but some of them do know. So and if they don't know, they have children that are the new generation. They have the young people that are coming on that will tell them that hey, there is this new plan and you need to listen to it. And it's not about you, old man. It's about me. And so I think discounting the elite and getting them on board is well, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But what we need to show them is a better plan, because the plan that they have isn't good. And if we show them, and the thing is, humanity is so large, we outnumber them. So they can only do so much. So if we don't have a plan as humanity, then their only choice is to go hide until things blow over, and then they come back out and they use HAARP or whatever, but to restore the earth and start over again. That's a really risky plan, but they'll follow us if we have a plan. And if we can bring the masses together and say, hey, we want to work with the elite, and then they'll have something to listen to, because we can offer them something better than their plan. You see what I'm saying?
Totally, totally. And just to be clear, Adam, I'm not saying that we discount the elite or write them off or anything like that. In fact, like I mentioned, when Darth Vader is standing at the intersection of Wilshire and Westwood, you're going to have a lot of elites driving by, a lot of elites spending a couple minutes at a red light, you know, listening and saying, holy crap. Now, that is, I think, vital to getting their attention. Once we have their attention, they're like, okay, what the heck does this guy stand for? Right? He's putting his life on the line. He's singing Spanish love songs. You know, he's taking on the drug cartels and talking about what is his plan? See, with that, we get an opening, and through that opening, we drive through the semi truck of our plan and say, this is our plan. And but it's not just a plan on paper. It's a plan that's being implemented through physical action in a public venue. And they can see, wow, you know, they so strongly believe in their plan, they're actually implementing it. Maybe let me take a look and see what the plan is, right? So I'm not at all opposed to sharing the plan with the elite and getting them on board. What I'm saying is there's a pathway to get there. And I think direct public action in a way that's completely audacious, puts lives on the line, shows how serious we are. I think that's an important part of it. So what is the plan? The plan that I'm proposing is to eradicate all forms of organized crime, including organized crimes against Mother Earth, but starting with the criminal drug cartels. That's why I'm going to go to the U.S.-Mexican border and serenade the criminal drug cartels and the entire Mexican population with Spanish love songs and with this giant message, criminal drug cartels out. That will go viral in Mexico. I know what I'm talking about because former Mexican President Vicente Fox and I in 2013 created the #1 story in Mexico for 2 days straight, all over the Mexican media. Adam says, but you're not offering a better plan. Yes, I am. The plan is to eradicate organized crimes, all forms of organized crime, including organized crimes against Mother Earth. That's the plan. It's a trajectory. We start by knocking down Humpty Dumpty, which are the criminal drug cartels, and then we go from there. Now, there's a lot more that needs to be refined about the going from there. But to take out the criminal drug cartels, it's literally as simple as repealing prohibition and replacing it with something sensible, like what Holland does, both with soft drugs and hard drugs. Anyway, I hope I responded to, okay, going on mute.
I'm going to hop in here. One thing, part of me would also like to think that the elite would help us, sort of like people who give them, you know, try to do a good few things and to make themselves look good. Maybe some of these people we could break through to, and maybe they could possibly be funders of the beginning of the thing. But you, Adam, are the guy who's like, we should get rid of money. So if you think you're going to walk into Bill Gates' home or some billionaire's home and say, hey, we got this great plan to save humanity and life on Earth, it's to get rid of money and put you in a little commune where you have to live with other people and share your stuff. I'm pretty sure that they're going to be like, this is crazy, and they're not going to want to get on board. Now, I just want to say, Jamin has his one idea. I have spoken about this in the past, and maybe I should just blot it out there. One of my ideas was that a group of people should get together and create an actual religion that revolves around putting Earth first and putting life on Earth first and making every objective to, you know, build your own community in a sustainable way, and then reach out to try to spread that to other people or try to take on bigger issues. And one of the reasons for being a religion is because in the United States, at least as far as I know, religions don't pay tax. And being a religion would be part of a large protest in a way, because if you are as upset as me as an American citizen that over half of the money that you would pay in taxes goes to this war machine that has no real benefit except for large corporations that want to steal fucking resources and make money off of creating weapons of mass destruction and murdering innocent people. I'm just saying that this would be a protest to not pay taxes. And so I've had that as being an idea. I kind of feel like people then just go, well, that's kind of crazy, Jason, creating a religion to not pay taxes and whatnot. But it was just one idea that I had. And, I think there needs to be a lot of people on the same page trying to really be focused on achieving goals. And some of those goals could be refreezing the Arctic and creating a sustainable community as a template to show other people how they can come together and create their own sustainable community with their own tribe of people. That would be good. I just don't see it out there. And I guess maybe I should just go and do it myself. But that's been one of my ideas. And then sometimes I do get shot down because people are like, well, that's just crazy. So there you go.
Great point, Jason. I just wanted to offer two things to say about the current conversation going on. And I guess that is a compliment to Adam and Jamin in that two suggestions. So I would suggest to Adam is that you want to talk to the elite. My difference between Adam and Jamin, is that Jamin doesn't think the elite's okay. Adam thinks we should definitely try getting the elite because they can flip the switch very easily, and that's true. Adam, try emailing the secretaries of the elite. There's 2,000 billionaires, right? So try emailing Richard Branson's secretary. Or, I'm sure there's at least one person in the chain of command you could email that could get a message to the elite, or you could at least try. What's the 6 degrees of separation? In six people, you can contact anyone. But just try to, there's probably at least the secretary's email you could try to at least try to get a message out. Because I think the difference between Adam and Jamin is that Adam has talked to some of the Jamin has talked to some of the elites. He's looked them in the eye and see that they don't give a whatever, since I'm not going to cuss, right? Right? Jamin has gone through that. And my suggestion to Jamin is he doesn't sell that story. I think we'd all like to hear, not that it matters to me, the story of you looking at a billionaire in the eye, the richest man on earth, something maybe all of us wanted to do at one point, to make as much money as possible. We've probably all been there before. I was like that 2 years ago, right? You looked him in the eye, right? You can tell this. I don't know what the story is, but I imagine it goes something like this. And you noticed he doesn't give a, whatever, right? And then also the drug cartel story, Jamin. Your grandfather had a hemp industry, or I don't know the story. I asked you about it once. I Googled your company, right? Why is it drug cartels? It's because you have knowledge in that sector, right? You don't choose that out of random. So you don't explain that story to people. And I think people hear that story and they have no idea what you're doing. They have no idea how you relate. And I saw your video of how you relate them to climate change because you have that poster. But the message just needs some configuring in just that. You need to describe what you know because you've done some work. Not many people have talked to Bill Gates. Not many people have done a company. Not many people understand the drug cartel business. And you just say these things like people understand them automatically. And that just takes some time. That's it for me. Miles is next.
Yeah, okay. So Jamin, just looking at the chat on YouTube, Maria says, way to go, Jamin. Deborah saying, you're awesome, Jamin. So great idea to raise awareness with your Darth Vader costume and sign. And it occurred to me, another thing that we could do is you could photobomb places or incidents where climate change is obviously the culprit. So for example, in Calgary, where we are a city at 4,000 feet above sea level, nobody ever had to worry about having air conditioning. You just opened your windows. And you had to close them because you got too cold. But as I said, this month, it's ridiculous. It's like summer weather that we sometimes don't even get in summer. So, if we had the radish sign, or even if you gave instructions as to the branding, the logo design, if you would allow, people could go and stand outside the air conditioning sales and, why are you having to buy this air conditioner? Have you ever asked why you're buying an air conditioner? Or down at Phoenix Airport, how many days this year are aircraft going to be sinking into the tarmac on the runways there? like they did last year. You know, maybe in Los Angeles, what is it? Was the water disappearing? Is it, you know, you could show up at the reservoir with your radish sign or your Darth Vader costume. So I don't know if anybody wants to share what are the issues in your area where, you know, maybe a radish sign could make a difference or bring awareness is what I'm talking about. Anyway, on mute.
Very good. Wow. Great stuff. You know, so many good points are being raised, and you know what we're basically doing with this road trip that we're on, and people are going to be flying in. My girlfriend's daughter is going to be Alice is going to be flying in from Belgium to join us on the street, and she's an amazing performer and singer and whatnot. My girlfriend's flying in. We're going to since Mohammed's not coming to the mountain, the mountain's going to go to Mohammed, and that's Alex in Austin, Texas. So we're going to take the show on the road. But what's really cool as an opportunity here is as we're doing these public events and getting the word out and talking into the microphone and all that, we'll have open mic and people will be able to come up and share their thoughts. So for example, if Jason wants to talk about creating this new religion, come to these public events and talk about it there, right? Let's just we need to get this conversation out in public, out into the world, and get people engaged. I think that's the golden opportunity we're looking at here. So anyway, you know, as far as the elites, they are so addicted. They're so addicted to their money, their power, their privilege, that they simply can't see it. They can't imagine it all going away. They can't imagine that they might be actually causing the problem or that money could be at the source of the problem. Anyway, my motion that we adjourn, but I don't like to cut anyone off. So what I think I'll just go on mute the camera. If you guys want to keep rolling, that's fine. You know, we'll just keep it recording. But anyway, we do have to get rolling. So anyway, I'm going to go on mute. Y'all can just keep rolling. We'll be listening in as we pack up and go, but then we're going to be out the door in a couple of minutes here. Anyway, I'll give you gentlemen the last words, or just keep it rolling if you want. We'll. What an awesome conversation! Really, really excited. Okay, going on mute.
I just wanted to respond to something that Miles said earlier about women and men leaders, and Joseph Campbell did one of the things he told about, and it's on YouTube, is that when mankind left hunters and gatherers, and they became herders and planters, the planters they kept a matriarchal type of leadership, but the herders, they developed more of a patriarchal leadership, a more warlike leadership. So I think that's when we left hunters and gatherers and we started planting and herding. There's something about herding that caused us to, I mean, that was more masculine. It caused us to become more warlike. And one thing about herding is when we were hunters and gatherers and we would kill an animal, we would kill that animal respectfully. And but when we started herding animals, we would essentially make friends with our animal friends, and then we would kill them and eat them. And in order for us to do that, there would have been a lot of guilt in that. So they had to come up with some kind of something to defend themselves from that guilt. And what they did, I think, is they became more warlike. They hardened their hearts. They overlooked the fact that they were killing their friends. And when they hardened our hearts, that made us forget about our respect for life. and so today we go to the store and we buy meat, and we don't even think about the life that was given. We are totally separated from reality. So, and I think that's where the difference came in from between the matriarchal and the patriarchal systems. And that's all I wanted to say. And I'll wait for Miles to respond, and then I'm going to go ahead and get off too. Thanks.
Yeah, I need to look up. Did you say Joseph Campbell, or that's the name? Joseph Campbell. Because I listened to somebody not too long ago. His name came up, and this person was also talking about, what has transpired to get us to this predicament. Hopefully, it's not a predicament, that we can actually do something to get out of it. But the idea of what you're talking about, when we moved to the agricultural business, and in particular livestock, not only did we become attached to our livestock because we owned that livestock, and we either had a brand on that livestock to identify it as ours, or we had fences too, because with agriculture came fences. So we started to put these walls up between ourselves. And this is mine over here. Don't come over here. And, if you shoot my cow, I'll shoot your cow. And maybe I'll even shoot you. I think that's all part and parcel of it too. So, and the word capitalism, I learned, comes from the root kappa, which comes from stock, a word that means livestock. And it therefore means to count things. So we were really concerned about how many cows we had. That's why we had the stock market. And that's what capital, the word comes from. So yeah, it's created this selfishness, I guess, in a sense. Yes. So I'm pretty well talked out too. So I'd just like to thank everybody, and great to see the initiative going on down there. Jamin and company, Darth Vader is going to show up on the freeways of Los Angeles. Stay tuned for that. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Adam.
Hey, Miles, I just posted the link to that Joseph Campbell video.
Okay, I will click on that link.
Oops. And I'll say goodbye to everyone too, and thanks to Jamin, and this has been awesome. So thanks, everybody.
You bet. Bye, everybody.
you.